What's up, guys? HAUNTMMA13 here with I'd say the most satisfying video to be able to do of the year, the end of year awards. Obviously the first year of my channel, I started it in, I think, about August, so towards the end of the year, but obviously I've seen all of the fight cards. But the ones that I've covered have been from August. But yeah, I'm coming here with an end of the year award show now. You know, when you come to these videos, very low quality editing, very low quality production, but I'd just come here to give my opinions basically on the fights that have happened. Hopefully I can get a better setup in the next few months, get my face on the screen, makes it easy to make the videos as well. But yeah, these are the awards for 2024 in MMA, but mainly the UFC. So the first award I'm going to do is a unique one that I don't think anyone else does. So I want to start with something that I think should be an award, because it's important to, the year in the company, and it's the division of the year. Now, as far as the divisions that have put on some good fights this year, I think welterweight's been decent. I think Leon Edwards and Bilal Muhammad was one of the more dramatic title fights of the year, simply because I think there was quite a big storyline coming into that. Bilal Muhammad was kind of underlooked by Leon Edwards because of the first fight, and then you also had fights like at the end of the year, like the Shavkat and Gary fight, which was probably one of the higher level contender fights this year, even though it turned out to not be the greatest fight. Um, and they've also just had a lot of contenders coming through, like Carlos Prates, who's good. In fact, the welterweight division, I'd say, has had the most new blood, like top contenders coming up of any of the divisions. Sean Brady's had a rebirth. There's been a lot of good stuff coming out that division. Even one of the better upsets of the Neil Magny Mike Malott fight. So we even had a fraud check there. It's been a good division. Another division that I think's always good is lightweight. With one of the best title fights of the year, I think, was the Dustin Poirier Islam Makhachev fight. I thought that was really, really just, when you feel like you get that big fight feel. That was like the one for me that felt like a big deal when I was watching it. Islam Makhachev for me is like, he's kind of overtook Khabib as that guy who you think, who can beat him. You're just like, can anyone beat him? Obviously, he has been beaten before, but it was like kind of like a lucky knockout. So he's like, whenever he fights now, it's becoming a big deal. So that's probably another one. As far as other fights in that division, Michael Chandler, Charles Oliveira was quite funny. Maybe for the wrong reasons, just watching Michael Chandler take a moral victory from that last round. And obviously you've had just fights sprinkled throughout the year, like Arman Tsarukyan versus Charles Oliveira, which was probably the other high-level elimination fight we've seen this year, on UFC 300. Obviously, the one that people are going to go to is Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway. So yeah, lightweight as usual is good. I think that's always going to be the case. That's easily the highest level division in the UFC. And yeah, but my pick for the division of the year is actually going to be, believe it or not, flyweight. Flyweight has had an unbelievable year. Like, people look at flyweight and think that's like a throwaway division in the UFC. Look at what we've had from flyweight this year. We've had 2 pay-per-view main events, which, when does that happen? And that was Steve Erzik versus Pantoja, and obviously the Asakura versus Pantoja fight, the last pay-per-view of the year. 2 good fights, especially the Erzik Pantoja one. That was a back and forth close fight. But the performance against Asakura by Pantoja was one of the best performances from anyone this year, in my opinion. A very underrated fighter, and he's entertaining a majority of the time. So that's just going on the title fights we've seen and main events. But we've also had one of my, you'll hear about this fight later in the prediction, one of my favourite fights this year from a technical standpoint, the Tatsuya Taira and Brandon Royval fight. A very underrated fight from this year, one of my favourite ones that I covered. I really did think that was high level technically. We saw some technical striking, scrambles, great wrestling, great submission defense. And just all round, it just looked like two high-level operators in there. And I think that was underrated because it wasn't like one of them blood and guts fight of the year kind of fights. But that was one of my favourite fights this year, and you'll hear about that later in these awards. But flyweight's just all round just had a rebirth for me. Like I was saying earlier, the rebirth's a bit of a theme here. And I feel like you look at some of the contenders such as well, obviously Mikhaev is not in the UFC now, but I think he's going to be back, and he actually had a good year, 2 wins in the UFC, and that was a bit of a storyline this year. And then you had Manel Kap's recent performance. He's back, he looks. That was an amazing performance. A few people have been glazing that, but that really was a good performance. And then Matt Schnell even managed to bring the chin back. So that was one of my underdog stories of the year. So I think flyweight's got to get a bit of love in that. And I can't believe I'm saying it, the inaugural Division of the Year winner on the HAUNTMMA channel is the flyweight division. So well done, guys. I wish I could have a graphic up there with all the victors, but sorry, guys, I need to get my production quality sorted. Moving on, a more expected award, what we seem to see every year, Breakthrough Fighter of the Year. Now, as far as Breakthrough Fighter of the Year goes, there's been a lot of fighters this year that have been impressive. Carlos Prates up there, definitely a good nominee for this award. Then you've got people, I'm going to give you a bit of a dark horse one because I have been impressed by his performances. Chase Hooper, I know they've not been against top quality, but Jordan Levitt, he had that other performance. I can't remember the name of the guy he was against. It was some bum, but he set like a strike record. And then, obviously his performance against the corpse of Clay Guida, but still he got an early sub there. So he's an underdog for that, but I don't think he's quite up there in the mix. Then you've just got more of the basic ones like Ian Gary, but he's just lost. But he was, I'd love to say it because I'm not an Ian Gary fan, but I'd love to say that Ian Gary, he looked great in that fight against Shavkat, but that was just not a good fight. Shavkat didn't look good in that, but I'm still going to give him credit. So he's got to be a contender for Breakthrough Fighter of the Year. You could definitely have Tom Aspinall as well in that, because even though he won his title in 2023, it was an interim title, and once he defended that belt, that's when I felt like he really broke through, and he became like, someone who people looked at as like one of these top 10 pound for pound guys. So he's definitely in the shout. And then obviously, just if you go down the lower divisions, we've got people like Mikhaev. He's not in the UFC now, but like I said, this isn't just a UFC. This is an all-round MMA Breakthrough Fighter of the Year, and he had a great performance on the Brave card recently as well to add to his year. But the winner of this award for me has got to be Carlos Prates, because the true definition of a breakthrough fighter is someone who wasn't on your mind earlier in the year, and then all of a sudden, by the end of the year, he's one of the names who's on your lips. And I feel like Carlos Prates, after that Neil Magny KO, even though Neil Magny is one of the lower level gatekeepers, I do feel like he proved in that Mike Millett fight that you've got to take him seriously. And Carlos Prates just made that look easy. And he's definitely my breakthrough fighter of the year. He's been active 3 or 4 fights, and he's looked great in every one of them. Moving on to another great award, Submission of the Year. Now this one, guys, I'm going to run through some nominees, but this one is a no-brainer for me. You had the Anthony Hernandez rear naked choke where he was grinning against Kopylov. Good moment, great. Not quite there for me. You also had the Islam Makhachev submission over Dustin Poirier. Decent, but not quite there for me. Another one that I'm going to put in there is definitely got to be the recent one, Pantoja against Kai Sakura, because that was a big hype derailing moment. Good, but just too basic for me. The submission of the year, without a doubt, and I can see this becoming quite one of those iconic finishes, is the Paddy Pimblett submission over Bobby Green. Now, I was at that event, in England. My first UFC event. I've been to MMA events before. My first UFC event. And I was in the front view when that happened, when he jumped that. I wouldn't even call it a guillotine. He kind of jumped like a half guillotine, half triangle, the way that, you know, how high his legs was. There was kind of over the arms. So it was one of the most unique things I'd seen. And it was almost like a knockout. Like when it happened, you could hear the crowd roar. I was there, and I was going crazy. But that transition into the triangle, then trapping the arm for the armbar, and leaving him curled, one of those images that'll just like be replayed over and over again. That's one of the best submissions in recent memory. Like that really was unique. You find a submission that reminds you of that. You know, we see rear naked chokes all the time. We see triangles. We've even seen a couple of flying triangles from Paddy himself. But this was a half flying triangle, half armbar, half guillotine, transition to snapping the arm and putting him out cold. One of the best things I've seen in grappling. And I aren't glazing. I am a Paddy fan, but I did not even expect something like that when I went to watch him and perform that night. What a submission, without a doubt, submission of the year and one of the best submissions in the past few years. Moving on, next award, Fighter of the Year. Now this one is a tough one, and I mean that because of two fighters in particular, and that is Alex Pereira and Ilia Topuria. Now, there's other fighters that you could put up there, but them two, they're the only two. Now, Alex Pereira, to give him, you know, his kind of claim for this award, has been extremely active. He's had 4 fights this year, and all of them have been impressive, and all of them have been finishes. Now, that's got to, you know, be impressive in title fights. That's unbelievable that there's even a debate. Ilia Topuria has fought twice this year, but I'm not exaggerating when that is against two of the probably the two best back-to-back title wins anyone has had in the UFC. I'm going there. Two best back-to-back title, and I'm a massive Ilia Topuria fan. I really am. I think he's amazing. I think he's a great fighter. Not as sold on his like trash talk and superstar like potential. I think he could be a star, but I think he's fighting similar to Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley's not that interesting as a personality, but his fighting style's that entertaining. Ilia Topuria or Alex Pereira, that's the question, and every video will be saying the same thing. I'm going with Alex Pereira, guys. I know that might sound crazy. Ilia Topuria did beat a Volk that was coming off a KO. And he also beat a Max Holloway coming up a division, who also just had a war with Justin Gaethje. Now, them two factors, you know, I know this. It's still amazing what he's done. First guy to knock out Max Holloway. But, sorry, coming down a division, should I say, which is even worse. That Max Holloway was coming down from lightweight. But that's got to be a factor. And Alex Pereira's been beating contenders all year. And that Roundtree fight could be another contender for Fight of the Year, which I'm going to be talking about later on. So Alex Pereira, for me, is the MVP of the UFC and the Fighter of the Year. And he's also probably had one of the most impressive years of anyone in UFC history. Moving on. Fight of the Year, speaking of it. Now, Fight of the Year, I think there's been some tremendous fights this year. Holloway versus Gaethje, what I've just mentioned. Then you've got Alex Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree. Then you've got one of my personal favourites in Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis. Can't wait for that rematch. I'm a fan of it. And then you've got technical fights like Tsutara versus Brandon Royval, which honestly is going under the radar. And I hope more content creators in MMA space do talk about that one. It's definitely worth a nominee. So out of all of these great fights, and sorry, one more mention that I mentioned earlier, Islam Makhachev versus Poirier, because that was a very good fight, and probably the biggest fight feel I got of the year. Now, out of all those fights, the one that really left a mark on me, and it's going to be an obvious pick, Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje. That might be, when we look back at Holloway's career, the last time we saw Max Holloway at his best. Because I think it's going to be tough for him to come back in this lightweight division. I really do think everyone in the top 15 is good in the lightweight division. Even though people mock certain fighters in the division, I think lightweight is a tough division. And I think that when you look at people who, when you're looking for a fight of the year contender, you look at what it meant. And I feel like that fight was two absolute warriors and legends of MMA in general, putting on an absolute heartfelt war. Like, they both wanted it more than like that finish wouldn't have happened if they didn't both want it so much. You know, when Max pointed to the middle and Gaethje started swinging like a retard. Perfect. You know what I mean? That's what you want to see. And I think that was the most emotional, like, you know, when a crowd, like, when something has an effect on you emotionally, that was the fight, and that is a no-brainer for fight of the year. So Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje, well done, guys. Hope to see you both still performing, but I think it's going to be hard for both guys in the comeback fights after the last performance. Pay-per-view of the year. Now, we've had some very good pay-per-views this year. 300, what a pay-per-view. One of the best cards in recent UFC memory. 302, Makhachev v Poirier, one of the higher level fights. A legend versus, like, the new guy fight that I love. Then you've got cards like 309, Stipe versus Jones, and Chandler versus Oliveira, as well as some great fights all across the card. You know, you've even got the most recent card that I thought was underrated, 310. Which was Ian Gary and Shavkat in the co-main, Volkov and Garn on the featured fight, and the main event of Asakura Pantoja, which, as I've already said, was one of the better performances of the year and underrated by a lot of people. And a flyweight banger, which we love, obviously, division of the year, remember? I'm edgy. No. And then, you know, just the regular overseas cards, like I said, 304, what I was at, which produced some very good performances. It produced, you know, Tom Aspinall, Paddy Pimblett, highlight reels. It produced Bilal Muhammad's title win, which is one of the bigger title win stories of the year. But I don't think that's going to necessarily be the event of the year, because I think when you're looking at events of the year, you're looking for, like, those events where people are thinking, shit, I can't miss this. And that's why it has to go to UFC 302. That was the event this year for me. And I know people are going to say UFC 300 should get the pick. The only reason UFC 300 ain't going to get that pick is the fact that I think when we look back, we're going to realise that Jamal Hill and Alex Pereira was not that fight. You're not that guy, bro. Whereas Poirier versus Makhachev is going to be looked back at as a legendary fight and one of Poirier's last fights and last great performances. Gaethje versus Holloway on 300 could make up for that, but I honestly just think when there's a title on the line and when you're going to see in a few years, I'm telling you guys, that Makhachev's going to go down as one of the GOATs, you'll realise how significant this fight was. And I'm not being edgy by picking it over 300, I just think it's the event, personally, for me, that I couldn't miss. Now for the final award of the video, and I've left this one last because I think it's got the best nominees. Knockout of the year. We all love a knockout. Any type of finish, but I feel like these in particular have been good this year. First nominee, pretty obvious one. Max Holloway's over Justin Gaethje. What a knockout. What a guy. Trendy, Aguilar. A lot of these guys from the Congo. What a guy. Max Holloway. Amazing knockout. Amazing moment. And also probably one of the funnier knockouts, to be fair. Face flat, Justin Gaethje, Homer Simpson in a way. You know, it was quite funny. Second nominee, Sharabullet Magomedov. Now, this one I've got a little clip of on my channel if you want to watch back. I was at my uncle's for this fight. My internet went down. I'm poor. Amazing knockout. Brilliant. One of the most flashy knockouts of the year. And definitely a contender for the list. Next nominee, controversial one. There's two knockouts on this card, but I've seen everyone glazing the women's knockout. The head kick. We've seen head kicks before. Wanting a title fight, not much on the line. If you're going to choose a lower level fight that's not for a title for your knockout of the year, like, for example, Max Holloway Gaethje, massive fight. Obviously, the Sharabullet knockout, unique knockout, so that one's on there. The women's one, it was a great head kick knockout, brutal, but we've seen knockouts like that before many times. We saw one recently on last night's card. The one on that card that got me was the spinning kick by Muslim Salikhov, and that's going to be my next nominee. And I'm not having 2 knockouts off that card. I want 1 off each card. So yeah, that's my next nominee, Muslim Salikhov spinning heel kick, because it's unique and you don't see it all the time. Last one was Buckley. Next knockout. Speaking of Buckley's KO of Wonderboy. Now this one, not necessarily the flashiest knockout or most crazy one, but I like the way that the wrestling and the wearing down got to this moment. I felt like the build behind this knockout made it so special, and it was probably the fight that we're going to look back on as Buckley's breakthrough. And I've just realised he could be on the breakthrough fighter list, but I still wouldn't probably pick him, to be honest with you. So Buckley, probably his breakthrough fight, but that one to me was still not, it's still not like the best knockout of the year. I just feel like it deserves a mention, and that was the breakout performance. So if I didn't mention him in the breakthrough fighter, at least he's got a mention at the end here. There you go, Mr. Goblin Buck. Next knockout, probably recency biased, but I'm going with Cub Swanson's KO over our good friend Billy Quarantillo. Now, the reason I like this knockout, I know this will sound goofy and a bit nerdy, for the camera angle. It was like one of those, you know, where the camera's right in front of him when he falls. It was epic. Like, the cameraman deserves a raise for that one. That he's as much part of this moment as anyone. Cub Swanson's also probably going to not fight again, so that's just a legend who I love to see cap off the year. And that was the real capping off of this year for me, because that Covington finish was a bit dud. Now, the winner, it's already on my channel, my reaction's there for you all. Sharabullet Magomedov versus Petrosian, yeah? Prachnio. I feel a bit racist now. Yeah, that's the knockout of the year. Not going to go for the Holloway Gaethje one. A lot will. That was kind of why Leon Edwards back in 22 got his knockout of the year, even though the Chandler over Ferguson one was better because of the moment it meant. But even though it was similar, you know, 5th round KO, similar to the Edwards one, I'm going with a more memorable knockout in general. I'm going with good old one eye. And that's even more impressive when you think he span and still got his technique and target perfect when he's got one eye, and though he was spinning, so at one point he was blind in the middle of that trajectory. Unbelievable. KO of the year. Thanks for watching, guys. I've loved this year making content for you. Hope you enjoyed this video. Get the production level up next year. Subscribe. HAUNTMMA13 out for